has tipped, and there you are. You're running for your life. You're a shooting star in all the years.
Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt Combs, and the last time we were with you on episode 48, we were talking a lot of identity. And Matt, I think that flows well into show 49 here, as we're talking that one shining moment. Obviously, our basketball fans out there recognize that March Madness reference, and this week we're talking what it takes to make a special tournament run. And as always, we thank Dr. Chris Good Health Chiropractic Center, for all his support in making the YouTube channel possible to support our local athletes, and then to do this particular podcast that just kind of touches on everything relevant in high school sports. And Matt, as I said there in the opening, there's nothing more relevant than tourney time right here, this time of year. Just kind of in an opening, just what that particular phrase tourney time means to you.
Yeah, I think it's an exciting time for everybody. You know, it's that for some people, you know, for some of your better teams, it's what they've been looking forward to, all year, or maybe since they've wrapped up their league championships or whatever, they kind of turn their attention to that. And, they've had this, in the back of their mind all year long, hoping to make a long run. And I think for some of your teams that maybe didn't have the regular season they hope for, it's an opportunity for a new season, right? Like people call it the second season, to kind of maybe try to do something that they can look back on and say, yeah, that tournament was really special. Maybe the regular season wasn't what we wanted it to be. So it's kind of a fresh start. And it's just kind of that there's just a certain feeling that surrounds it, whether it be at the high school level, which is obviously what we'll talk about mainly, but also, as the March Madness for years at the college level has always been fun. And so it's definitely, I think, one of those things. It's certainly not unique to just basketball, but it just feels like for whatever reason that basketball tournament has something, a little extra special to it.
Yeah, I think that's well said. I think this past week, this is probably my favorite stretch of sports throughout the whole calendar. Basketball, baseball overlapping here. This past week was a nutty week for me where, in one 24-hour period, I coached a 2-hour baseball practice and then coached a district semifinal girls basketball game. It's one of those where the red spring training starts. You're starting to get closer to Selection Sunday. The high school tournament's going on, and it is an exciting time. And I think even when your team is eliminated, I find myself even in a professional development way watching and just trying to figure out, hey, what do we have to do to take those next steps and so forth? What's missing? I know yesterday, we're recording this on Sunday afternoon. I know from late Friday night through all day Saturday, I probably watched 6 district championship girls games, stretching divisions 2 through 4, and then watched 2 more sectional championship there on the boys' side. So it's an interesting thing, and I guess it leads us into the show here, Matt. As I was thinking back to our identity show and how that relates into to you go all year long, and as you said, some teams it's their championship, and that's the next checklist thing that they go to the next step. For other teams, maybe it hasn't gone the way they wanted to. And tournament time's always that start over time, right? It's that second season, everybody's 0-0 type of record. I'm sure we've all given that speech to our kids before. So it's just an interesting thing I want to throw to you to start. If we are looking at the question directly throughout this entire show 49, what it takes to make a tournament run, where do you start with in terms of throwing out that one main point in terms of starting the list for those answers?
Yeah, for me, I had several points written down, and I don't know what I would say number one is, because I think there are things that are relatively obvious, Shayne, that you have to have a certain level of talent to make a tournament run, and you have to do some things within the game of basketball, fundamentally, right? Some of the fundamentals you have to be pretty sound in on both ends of the floor and all that. And maybe you might want to touch on some of those as we go. But I guess for me, one of the things that jumps out at me as teams get into these tournament runs is by the time you get to tournaments, all right, you've played hopefully 22 regular season games in high school, right around there. And, not to sound like, I think it was Dennis Green, like, you are what your record says you are, anything like that, but you are a little bit of who you are by this time. And what I mean by that is, whatever habits you've fallen into, whatever sort of tendencies you have, it's awful hard if you've done those for 3 months to be able to turn around and be something totally different than that, all of a sudden at the tournament level. And what I mean by that is, so like if you're a team, I always say this, if your longest winning streak all year long is 3 games, I think it's unlikely that you're going to run off 5 games or 6 games and make some state tournament trip. Now, are there exceptions to those rules? I mean, maybe you're the smallest school in your league and you're overwhelmed in league play and you can never really get it going in terms of a winning streak. And then all of a sudden you get in the tournament, right? And you start playing against schools your own size and you are able to make that run. You see that a lot. You see that a lot. Like I remember there was a school over in the Cincinnati area for years. I think it was Bishop Fenwick, that for a long time, and I think they've grown, but they were one of the smaller schools in their league. And you'd always see them make a nice tournament run where they couldn't compete against some of those bigger Catholic schools in that Cincinnati, that GCL or whatever they were in at the time, I think. But, so I know you've experienced this a little bit in baseball, right? I mean, as being a smaller school in your league, and maybe it's hard to in the SVC, it's probably hard to run off 4 or 5 straight wins, and all of a sudden you get into tournament play and you're playing against some schools closer to your size. So there are exceptions, but I guess what I'm saying, Shayne, is, whatever you've been able to accomplish in a regular season, it's pretty difficult to completely outdo that just a week after your regular season when tournaments start. Like, let me give you a different example, and then I'll turn it over to you and let you go for a little bit. But like, if you're a basketball team that, hey, on the year we're shooting 30% from the floor and averaging 51 points a game, the chances of you going on a 2-week stretch or a 3-week stretch in the tournament where you shoot 40% from the floor and average 65 points a game is not likely. Now, could you catch lightning in a bottle one night? And that's what makes tournaments great, right? That one night, you could do that, right? That one night you could just play out of your mind. But I think what I'm talking about today, Shayne, is making tournament runs, right? Tournament success in terms of like making that deep special run to maybe the regional level. And it's tough to overcome some of those habits. If you're a team that turns it over a lot, are you all of a sudden going to take care of the ball tournament? I mean, it's some of these things sort of stick with you. And I guess, so when I look at a team, I look at their regular season and say, okay, what is this team? Who are they? And then based on that, how far can they really go?
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think right at the top of my list, and I didn't want to be too blunt or too like over the top, but I think you have to state the obvious first. I think you have to have talent. I mean, it's one of those things where, are there the Cinderella runs every now and then? Sure, to the regional level or so forth. But let's be real honest. You have to be very, very talented. And if I were going to break that down into a couple areas, I think there's 2 things that come to my mind that I see. Number one has to be guard play. And then I would even stretch it out to, I really think you have to have star power. And here's why I say that. I think what happens in the tournament play, things get a little bit more physical. Things usually officials want to call less fouls. And we're talking about, we did a show a while back on, the number of fouls that are called in basketball anyway. So when you get to the tournament game, it even ramps up to another level. The ability to have guards that can just dribble, pass, and catch cleanly, and the higher their skill level is, probably the more physicality they can play through, I think is very, very important in terms of taking care of the ball. But then I think star power is very, very important. I think what happens is, if you every now and then you've got to have that one kid that can go get you a bucket. You got to have that kid that when the play breaks down, scouting is up. Let's face it, in today's time, by the time you get to tournament, as a coach, if you want to work hard enough on it, you could have 7, 8 on. you have to have that one player that can just sometimes go get you one. And I've even seen examples where having that type of player can help you with the officials. I mean, look, officials are human. Officials are they're basketball fans, I assume. You know what I mean? That's why they do what they do, to stay in the game and to give back to the game and so forth. So I see that as a huge opportunity to maybe survive those runs, get to the free throw line that extra time. Sometimes, they want to be careful not to call that third foul in the second quarter, that fourth foul in the third quarter, foul that kid out in the fourth quarter. So when I think of talent level, that was the first thing on my list, and I had it kind of subplotted there as guard play, but then having that one star player that kind of as you start getting into that district final level, that makes you, I don't know if legitimate's the right word, Matt. Just your take on that. I mean, you kind of played that role on a team that made a special run. Like, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I completely agree, Shayne, with the elite player thing, or that star player, because I think as you look at every level of basketball, that a lot of times, I mean, I think it's like I said before, it's understood that you have to have a certain level of talent to make a run. But I think that having that one elite player a lot of times is a game changer. You see it a lot at the college level. Think back, and I'm going back into the memory vault here a little bit, but like think back about some teams that won national championships that nobody really thought would when the tournament started, like a Syracuse team with Carmelo Anthony the one time, or the Connecticut team with Kemba Walker, right? I mean, you have,
Sure.
And a lot of people will say, and I've heard, guy like Jay Billis say it. I heard Dick Vitale used to say it. If you're going to win a national championship, you have to have a pro. You have to have a couple pros, typically. I mean, so if you take that down to the high school level, you have to have a couple of those elite players. You have to have, or at least one, or probably, to make a really deep run, multiple, elite players that can, just that they are different, and I mean, just that one player who can go maybe get to a basketball that another player can't, or a player that, I think in the girls' game, sometimes that's even magnified, right? You'll find that team that just has that special player that nobody else has, that can sort of, and it's not even always about scoring 35 points. It's about, man, this kid just kind of gets to a couple loose balls that nobody else gets to a couple rebounds that nobody else gets, able to jump a passing lane and make a game-changing type of play. I just think that if you're really going to make that type of run, typically you have to have at least one of those elite kids.
I don't think there's any question. I think the second thing on my list, and I want to see if it related to anything on your list, would be matchups. I think matchups are unique. I mean, the way we do our seeding in most areas of Ohio, we're getting to the point where we're stretching out a little bit more, and I do think we're getting more of our best teams to the correct levels. I think we're still lacking in some fair matchups and maybe in the earlier rounds, but overall, I just told you I watched, like here in our area, 95% of the best teams are going to the regional. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things on the girls' side, and 95, if not 100% of the best boys teams are heading to the district as we speak. So, I mean, I do think talent is winning out, so to speak, but I also think they're something that can turn a district semifinal run into a regional semifinal run in a hurry. Can sometimes just be a matchup of, man, we don't match up real well with this team, but if we can stay away from them, we're good enough to beat anyone else on a given night, that type of thing. Just your take on matchups over the year, because when you put your 20-2, 19-3 teams aside, and you kind of get into the middle of the pack, a lot of times there's not a huge difference between, say, a 16-win team and a 12-win team, and there's a bunch of those sometimes right there in those middle bracket games. Just your thoughts on matchups.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think, like you just mentioned, talent seems to win out early in the tournament a lot of times too. I think though, when you're talking about making those deeper runs, especially what I had written down right here, and I think it kind of goes with what you're talking about, is you have to be able to win different styles of games. I think to make deep runs, you have to be able to win multiple styles, because the matchups you're talking about, you know, I've said it all along, if you're the type of team that plays one way, a certain way, chances are you're eventually going to run into somebody else that plays that way and they're better than you at it. And that's a scary feeling as a coach, and I've had that feeling. I can tell you, we played, one of the times that we were fortunate enough to make it to the regionals, we ran into a John Glenn team that ended up winning the state championship. And we got up and down the floor and played pretty fast. I mean, that was our style of play. Well, it didn't take me very long to figure out that they played that way too, and were way better at it than we were, and all of a sudden now, what do you do? And I think as a coach, sometimes it's tough, because think about this. All right. If you've played a certain way all year, and all of a sudden you look at your team in the regional tournament and say, listen, we can't play this way. We're going to have to change what we do. Well, you're immediately telling your team that you don't think they're as good as their opponent. Okay. I mean, that's the first thing that's happening there. But maybe that's necessary too, right? Sometimes you have to do that. I've done both ways, and that John Glenn team I'm talking about, we went ahead and we played the way we play, and we got drilled. But I've also,
We had that undefeated team the year you ran into the Chillicothe team, right?
Yeah. Well, that again, we didn't, and we weren't necessarily the same style. But again, they were so much better than us. No matter what we tried, it seemed like it didn't work out. But to give you an example, the year before, we played that Chillicothe team in the districts, and we slowed things down. We played real methodical. They were a little surprised by that, hadn't seen that. We were actually ahead at halftime in that game, because, we did change styles, and my team accepted that and said, okay, listen, we know how talented this team are. We're going to have to be different. Now, again, did talent went out in the second half? Yeah. They came after us, they pressed us, they turned us over a little bit, and they out athleted us. But yeah, so I've tried it both ways. My point is, I think it's really dangerous if you're only able to win one type of game. If you're only able to win a game that's up and down the court and in the mid 60s to low 70s, what happens when that one team's good enough to get you in a half court game? If you're only capable of winning games in the 40s, what happens on those nights? You just got to score more than that. Some people might remember the Southeastern teams years ago that had like Chris Skaggs and some of those guys, that they were really, really good teams. They were zone teams. Remember that? They played zone, really, really good at it. But it seemed like, a couple different times, I think one time against a Sugar Creek Airway, you get to the regionals, and all of a sudden you get behind 4 or 5 points late, and you can't play zone anymore. You got to stretch it out. You got to come after people. You got to, and it put them in tough situations. I think that eventually, if you can only win one way, you're going to run into problems as you get deeper into the tournament. I think the teams that can win a slow-paced game, a fast-paced game, an ugly win, as people call it sometimes, or you see what I'm getting at there, Shayne. Maybe you can help explain that even better a little bit.
Well, I think it's just definitely something that's going to come about throughout the course of a tournament run, especially like you said. Okay, if your talent dominates the opponent, say in the sectional final and then district semi, you're going to start to get to teams that are obviously better or as good as you get into the district final. Really, that's why they're there. So I think those style of games become really, really important. I think, the couple times you've gone 22-0 there at Benton County, we used to talk about that. You would come out of a game where you'd feel like, man, the other team just dictated everything. And, I remember telling you found a way to win. You're not going to go 22-0 without being able to win 3-4 different. It's the same thing here in the tournament. The way things are magnified in the tournament, I don't think you can win. Let's say you get your bye in the sectional, where a lot of these sectional brackets just require you to win one and get out. I don't think you're going to be able to win 5, 6 games in a row without, like you said, winning a game that's probably played 10 to 15 points under what you normally average, and maybe even 10 to 15 points above what you average. And I think that's where you have to have a little bit of talent, a little bit of offense. At some point, I don't care how well you guard, you got to score. I watched a matchup yesterday against one of the best defensive girls teams in the state, and they were locking down, and then the talent of the other team just started making shots. I don't know that the team wasn't defending as well. They just started making shots, and that team came back and beat them. So I think the style things. I guess I'll transition over to this and tell me. I don't mean to be funny on this. I just think it's reality. One of the things I had down is luck. You know what I mean? When you start talking one and done format, like I don't know if you got college basketball yesterday. Did you see the Arizona State kid throw it in from the other side of half court to beat Arizona?
Yeah.
What if that's a tournament game? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Arizona's done. You know what I mean? It's one of those things where you see these buzzer beaters and these last second shots and they're going to the video and all that. You know, sometimes it may be to send it in overtime, but sometimes it's if it goes in, we move on, and if it doesn't go in, you move on. And it's one of those where I guess you could look at injuries. You could look at that bang bang call in the fourth quarter. You could look at upsets in your bracket. We talked about that earlier. You know what I mean? Maybe there's that incredible team that's in the waiting on you in the district final, and then all of a sudden in the district semis, I watched some state ranked teams get knocked off over in the central district in the sectional play and district semifinal play. So is it wrong to call that luck or good fortune or what? What's your take on that?
Oh, I think look, we can sit here and act like, hey, we're really smart. We're going to break this thing down, but there is luck involved. My coach in high school used to say you have to be really good and you have to catch some good breaks. And I think he's right. You do have to have that. Very seldom do you see a team make a run, let's say, especially to a state tournament level run or a state championship, and not look back and say, oh man, that could have all ended on that night right there if this wouldn't have happened or that wouldn't have happened. The run I was a part of in high school, I guarantee you there were 2 or 3 times where you're like, holy man. Nobody even be talking about us. If that wouldn't have happened right there, we'd have been beaten in the section or the district. And then all of a sudden, you catch a break and then you make your own breaks by, what you do, obviously. And then before you know it, you make this deep run. But injuries, you mentioned that, plays a huge part in it. Huge part in it. My senior year of high school, one of our best players broke his hand at a pep rally. Think about that for a minute. The day of a district championship game, he broke his hand in a skit at a pep rally. So it's you don't ever know, what might happen or what could happen. With any one and done situation, that's why I always say, like, when you watch like sports at the professional level where it's a best of 7, very seldom. And I don't know if you agree with this or not, Shayne, but it seems to me like very seldom when it's a best of, do you get major upsets? Now I think in baseball's a little bit of a different sport, right? Because if you just get the right pitcher on the right night, whatever. But very seldom do you not get the best teams winning a best of 5, best of 7, because it's that even if you catch lightning in a bottle and you pull that upset one night, you have to prove over the course of a series that you're the better team. But when you're dealing with high school basketball and it's on any given night and you're dealing with 16, 17-year-old kids, weird things can happen. And you do have to catch some breaks.
Well, probably the final point I had down, and then I'll ask you for some closing thoughts, is this. I look back, and tournament time's been really, really special to me. I think, four times as a player, I was able to go to the district final, never did make the regional. And basketball coaching, probably been to the district, I'm thinking somewhere around 7 total times, 8 total times, maybe through boys and girls. And again, never made the regional. Baseball, been lucky enough to make the regional 3 times. And the saying that comes to my mind through all of that, Matt, that makes a lot of sense to me, that never did really growing up, is you'll hear the sports cliche of, sometimes you don't pick the year picks you. And I want you to think about how true this is. Like, there's some years where, hey, we're really good this year, we got a chance. And
Yeah.
then sometimes one of these things happen to you where you lose in double overtime in the district semifinal or whatever happens. And it's just, we did right here on this YouTube channel. People can go back and look at the Why Not Us, the awesome piece we put together on your Uniota basketball team, state finals. And you can follow those things and you can see where you could have lost in the sectional. You could have lost in the district semi. You could have, what I'm saying? Like all the way through, there was all kinds of things that had to happen the right way. But, a lot of times you'll then think, we may not be quite as good this year. This may be more of a rebuilding. Before you know it, you find yourself looking at your tournament bracket and you're like, wait a minute, we can win that game and we can win that game. And before you know it, you're playing for a district championship with a chance to go to the regional. So I've seen that in a lot of cases where I know in baseball sometimes if I look back, 2 or 3 of my best teams got stuck in Division III playing teams that went on to go to the regional final or even state in Division III, where other teams that you would think, well, that's a rebuilding year for Paint Valley. Well, we had a stud pitcher, a Division I college pitcher, and a really good catcher. And before you know it, we're in the regional. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's one of those things that where like I think you really do have to attack each year with this the same vision and the same purpose, because this stuff has a funny way of working itself out. Just your thoughts on closing remarks before we get out of here this week.
Yeah, well, let me respond to that right there, Shayne, what you just said, because that is an interesting take. I do think, and maybe it goes along a little bit with catching the breaks, right? But it's like it is kind of, are you fortunate enough to have your best team on the right year in the right place, the right time, right? I've been a part of runs. I was a part of a run as a player where the number 1 team in the state got upset in the sectional championship. We made it to the state tournament, and the St. Henry team that was so dominant with Bobby Hoying, that had just, kind of really killed Southeastern the year before in the state tournament, right? They all of a sudden dropped to Division IV, and we don't have to play them in the state tournament. Right. I always tell my friends from Southeastern, we'd have beat them anyway, but that wouldn't have happened. Yeah. So we were glad they dropped to Division IV. But so it's just these little things like you're talking about, right? Where just how sort of that draw works out. I've also, as a coach, unfortunately, been to the regionals twice when, we were beaten by the eventual state champion. And then, sometimes too, I can remember looking at Division II boys basketball. And since I started coaching 20 some years ago in Division II, up until last year, no team had ever made the state finals when a central district team was in the regional. Every team that had ever made it was because there were 2 East teams coming in, and there was no team out of the Columbus area or Central coming in. Now, last year, Waverly beat Heath out of the Central, but Heath is even sort of a borderline East team, right? I mean, you don't even think of Heath as a Central District team, but it's like, whenever those Central District teams came into Division II, your Columbus DeSales or your Beechcrofts or whoever, we had to play Eastmore Academy the one year. It's those teams when they come into the regional really cause Southeast teams problems. And so, all these things, I guess, Shayne, go into sort of a little bit of the luck, right, of the draw. The only other thing I had on my list, and I guess you could almost sort of combine these two a little bit, and then you can, if you want, just kind of get into your closing thoughts or whatever. I do think at the tournament level in basketball, and this is especially even more true now, I guess, just even with the way we do our sectionals, is you have to be able to win away from home. You have to be able to win games that aren't comfortable in terms of, because I think when you play at home, it's just more comfortable. Obviously, you're on your home court, you're in front of your home fans, you're on the rims you practice on every day. You don't have to get on a bus and travel. You warm up to the same music. You do this, you do that. Everything's a routine, right? And all of a sudden now, especially in the sectionals, you literally play a road game. It used to just be away from home on a neutral site. You literally have to win 1 or 2 road games now, depending on, the way your sectional district's set up. And even after that, from that point on, you're playing on floors that are foreign to you, away from your home court. And I think that comes, Shayne, don't you feel like that's where, and we haven't talked about this specifically, that experience comes into play too a little bit. Like, I feel like teams that make runs have kids who have at least been a part of maybe a little bit of a smaller run before. In other words, last year we made it to the district finals and we got knocked off. Well, this year, guys, we're going a step further. We're going to make it, we're going to the regionals this year, and you kind of have that attitude of it's our turn to sort of take one more step. And it's that experience factor, regardless of the experience of your coach. And I think that can help too, but really the experience of your players, you know what I'm saying? What they've been through as a group already.
No, I think that's a great point. I'm glad you said that. I did have the word experience up on the guard play, actually, that I mentioned earlier. I think that's really, really important. When we get, and I don't want to cut you off, were you able to hit every bullet
Yeah,
point?
no, that's why I say, I really just wanted to kind of throw that in because I kind of felt like it went with, a little bit of what we've already talked about, I guess, of it's kind of like when the year chooses you type thing. Not just a year you have talent, but a year that maybe your talent's already been through some of those things on the way through. And, just the timing of, I guess, the timing of it all.
Well, the summary of it all, is what I always like to do. And we talked about talent, we talked about experience, we talked about styles of play and matchups and a little bit of luck thrown in there. So I think the summary kind of speaks for itself. There was one point I wanted to make in the closing remarks that is related to this topic, but it's kind of goes back to something we talked about in previous expanding the zone episodes, and that's consistency. There's something to be said for the special tournament run, but there's also something to be said, Matt, for consistency of programs that year after year after year after year win sectionals, go to the district finals, district runner-ups. Some you may have a school that makes a special run to the regional, but maybe they've only been to the district title or the district level maybe 2 out of 10 years or whatever, and they had a special team or a special run. That's awesome. But for whatever reason, I think I get bothered in sports by we have such a lack of appreciation for consistency on what it means to, because when you start winning, say 8 sectionals in 10 years, you're doing it with rebuilds, you're doing it with young teams, you're doing it with old teams, you're probably doing it with these things that we said. You're probably doing it when luck worked against you, when luck worked for you. You've probably won styles of games that were uncomfortable. And I think when it comes to winning seasons, which, your regular season has a lot to do with your tournament. We didn't mention that. Your regular season consistency puts you in a better spot to win a sectional and to win that first district game. So in the summary of closing remarks, I just wanted to mention that I know we're talking about the regional or Final Four run, but I in no way want to downgrade how important it is when a program shows the consistency to just be there every single year.
Yeah, Shayne. That's right on the money, man. I couldn't agree more because it's one of the things we always preach to our guys, even on our locker room wall, it said, it's easy to be good every now and then. What's hard is being good every day. And it's that consistency of really, because I'll tell you this, I'll just say this. I'm not saying that either one's more important than the other. I don't think there's anything more special than that tournament run, right? Because those are the things that are really fun and the community gets behind you and you get these huge crowds like at the Convo or wherever you're playing, if you're on the girls' side. Don't get me wrong. I think most coaches would tell you they wouldn't trade a great tournament run for anything, right? But I think if we're being honest, at least my opinion, the 3 district championships that I was fortunate enough to be a part of as a coach, they weren't any more difficult. In fact, they might have been less difficult than the 12 or 13 league championships or whatever we had, because when you win a league championship, you've got to do that over the course of 12, 13, 14 games, whatever your league plays. You've got to
win the way. There's no luck in the schedule. You're playing them all.
No, you're playing them all. You're going to play road games. You're going to play on nights where your kids are sick. You're going to play, there's all kinds of different things that go throughout the course of the season. And to have that consistency of winning those league championships, I think, honestly, probably say more about your team than putting together a 3-game winning streak and getting to the regional. But make no mistake, I think most people would always want that tournament run because of the fun that sort of surrounds it, right? But yeah, no, I think that's an excellent point. There's no question about it.
Well, look, a lot of fun. I'm excited to see some more tournament basketball down the stretch here, and then we're transitioning over into spring. And in fact, on our episode number 50, Matt, we're going to be taking a look at when you transition from one sport to the other and you're sharing athletes, how much of an impact does it have on that next sport? So, for example, on your track program, on your softball program, on your baseball program, if you have the basketball teams making the run or a wrestler maybe making a deep run. Just an interesting topic to discuss in terms of some coaching and professional development. So as always, thank you, Chris Good, for all the support. Make sure you check us out on YouTube if you want to see the video version of our podcast, Expanding the Zone. If you're more of someone driving in the car or just there at work, always turn us on. We appreciate that. Wherever you get your podcast, we're out there expanding the zone. So, Matt, until next time there, look forward to doing a great 50th show with you. But this has been a lot of fun talking tourney time, and we'll catch up with everyone soon. Thanks, everyone.
Win or lose, you always did your best. 'Cause inside you knew, in one shining moment you reached for the sky. In one shining moment you knew, yeah. In one shining moment you're willing to try. In one shining